Corpus Christi police have now identified the 4 officers involved in the Sunday night shooting that left a Corpus Christi man dead.
Our Michael Gibson joins us now with those details in tonight's lead story.
That's correct, Rudy and Leslie. Those 4 officers have now been identified as Officer Philip Peterson, who's been with the department for some 4 years, Officer Antonio Contreras, who's been with the department 3 years, Officer Zachary Rogers, who's been with the department for just 1 year, and Officer Jimmy Leal, who's also been on the force for 1 year. Now, it was around 11 o'clock on Sunday when police were called to the 4300 block of Brentwood near Horn Road. When officers arrived on the scene, they found 22-year-old Emilio Mojica, who was allegedly waving around the bat and was not following commands. Police say they tried using tasers on Mojica 4 different times, but they were ineffective. Mojica continued to make threats with a baseball bat, and eventually an officer discharged his weapon and struck him. Today, CCPD announced Officer Philip Peterson was the one who discharged his gun. As for Mojica, he was taken to the hospital where he later died from his injuries. All 4 officers involved in the shooting remain on paid administrative leave. CCPD says the case is still under investigation. If you have any information regarding the shooting, you're asked to call the department at 361-886-2840. Rudy?
Thank you, Mike, for that.